All right, next video, chat. Every birthed generation explained in 9 minutes.
The Lost Generation. Despite taking place over 100 years ago, the Lost Generation has many similarities to today. Growing up as a young man or woman...
Bro, you know what's nuts, though? A lot of if you have alive grandparents, your grandparents' grandparents were alive possibly around this time. Not a guarantee, but if you have, like, a grandpa that was born in, like, the 1940s, their grandparent could likely be born in the late 1800s, early 1900s, which is just, like...
man or woman in this time period, you were met with war, a pandemic, harsh economic times, and changing social conditions. World War I was brutal for this generation. More than 70 million people were mobilized, 8.5 million were killed, 21 million were wounded, and 2 million soldiers died of disease. Speaking of disease, the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 to 1920 was also not merciful, with some reports estimating 17 to 50 million.
If you were to talk to someone in your family from a specific year, what would it be? I would love to go back to either the 1600s or whenever my family lineage, like one of my family members were here, or way back. Like, I'm talking like BC, Greco-Roman time, like fucking 2000 BC type shit. Like, I would want to go so far back and just be like, yo, I'm your great-great-great-grandson. Here's a fucking iPhone. Wham. I'm from the future, bitch. And they'd be like, well, that'd be like caveman times. Not, they'd have language in the Greek era. If I'm going caveman time, they'd be, you know, they'd be befuddled at what I know.
Million deaths worldwide, and other reports claiming as high as 100 million. After the war and the pandemic, the world experienced economic turmoil, leading to the Great Depression in the 1930s, resulting in high unemployment rates, poverty, and a general sense of hopelessness. Popular culture began to rise in the form of early cinema and magazines.
Yo, isn't this the time when they like kid chimney sweepers too? And they would like make a kid crawl in a chimney, and like a lot of the time they would get lost and just die. That's like a thing, where they would have kids that would crawl into a chimney, and if they got lost, they'd get stuck, and they'd just die in someone's chimney.
As people searched for a distraction from the bleak life they were presented with, women gained the right to vote in 1920, and new employment opportunities for unmarried women widened, as many women were left widows due to the war. This era saw the rise of a new type of young woman in pop culture.
Yeah, this is when motherfuckers would freak out about people showing a little bit of ankle. You would say, oh, you see the ankles on that woman? Holy, somebody said holy kneecaps. Oh, wow, look at that elbow.
Known as the flapper, known for being rebellious against previous social norms and featuring a more reckless...
Oh, wait, no, this is when they got out of that. This is when, yeah, they showed a little bit of thigh.
...and party-going attitude. Today, the Lost Generation is remembered...
Yo, imagine the guys in this era walking around like some festival in Miami with women with just, like, nipple pasties on. Oh my god. They'd probably have a stroke.
...for their resilience and being able to survive a harsh and difficult time period.
They'd probably just die right there and then.
Some say it could provide insight into modern or future time periods. The Greatest Generation. This generation is also known as the World War II generation, and is remembered for its heroism and technological innovation and prosperity. The youth during this time would grow up with many inventions becoming popular and normalized, like the radio, telephone, and automobile. It was a major time period for culture and entertainment in America. Literature, art...
Bro, your grandparents' grandparents didn't have cars. Holy shit. Holy shit. You know what's really fucking nuts? Henry Ford was alive when some of your grandparents were alive. To do that automated, like, fucking car manufacturing.
Music and cinema flourished during this time period, as the golden age of Hollywood began, and gangster films, music films, comedy...
Also, what's crazy is that they were more rich, accounting for inflation, than any billionaire alive today. Like Henry Ford. Wait, no, not Henry Ford. Rockefeller was worth $1.4 billion when he died in 1937. $24 billion in 2018. Yo, who's the billionaire that I'm thinking of that was worth like $400 billion today? Was it Andrew Carnegie? I don't know. One of those old motherfuckers. Was it Rockefeller? Vanderbilt? I don't know. Not Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa was worth like a fucking trillion. He had just like billions of pounds of gold. This article says Rockefeller amassed a fortune of $410 billion adjusted for 2022. I don't know how true that is, though, because that's fucking Wikipedia. $410 billion. Yo, that must have sucked being rich in, like, the early 1900s. Because, like, you just didn't do anything with your money. Like, what would y'all do if you were, like, if you were rich in the 1940s? What do you buy? Nothing. Like, literally nothing. Like, you could go places. Somebody said slaves. Yeah, you're a little too far in the future there, buddy.
Films and monster films became extremely popular and gathered massive audiences. It was also the advent of comic books, as huge franchises like Superman and Batman began. In the music industry, jazz, blues, gospel music, folk music, and swing jazz all became large genres. The rise of the radio influenced many Americans during this time period, as millions would tune in and listen to President Roosevelt's famous fireside chats. And
God, dude, people in the 1920s were probably so fucking boring. Like, maybe they would have a cool conversation here and there, but you know damn well they just sat on their ass and stared at a wall. Listen to the radio, they'd play in fucking grass and shit.
About the news in an exciting way. 16 million Americans served in World War II, the majority being members from the Greatest Generation. 38.8% were volunteers, 61.2% were draftees, and would serve the average length of 33 months. There were approximately 671,000 casualties in the United States. As of 2023, almost 120,000 of the Americans who served in this war are still alive today.
Wow.
The Silent Generation. The Silent Generation grew up with their parents both witnessing the fall of Nazism and the rise of their new enemy in the era, communism. When the children of this era began coming of age after World War II, they were faced with a devastated social order following World War II, as the Soviet Union betrayed America's post-war agreements and the global powers would face off.
The nightmare blunt rotation. Fucking Stalin, Winston Churchill, and who the fuck is that dude that dropped the nuclear bomb? Oh my god. What is his name? Can't remember it. Truman? Is that Truman? Yeah, that's Truman.
For the next 50 years. Unlike the previous generations who had fought for changing the system, the Silent Generation was about working within the system, keeping their down and working hard. They were heavily influenced by the golden age of radio, the rise of trade unions, the development of transatlantic flight, and the discovery of penicillin during their formative years. Silents tended to marry and have children young, and their attitude of taking no chances would become criticized by future, more radical generations.
This is when the American dream was still a fucking thing. When you could, like, work a 9-to-5 and own, like, a big-ass house.
Such as baby boomers. Finally we talk about the boomers. Possibly the most famous modern birth generation and one of the most active time periods in American history, the boomers of the 40s, 50s, and 60s were known for their ridiculously high birth rates. With 76 million births.
Yeah, because people started fucking after World War II. Yeah, they got back from that shit and they said, yeah, that's when oh, I'm still alive type shit. Let's have kids.
Taking place during this time period. This is due to a strong post-war economy in which Americans felt confident they would be able to support a large number of children. Boomers influenced the economy as a core marketing demographic for products tied to their age group, from toys to records. On top of this, many items previously deemed luxurious, such as laundry machines, the dishwasher, the refrigerator, and the telephone, entered mass production.
Yo, and I don't understand this, and this is gonna sound really fucking stupid. You know how refrigerators used to have to bring ice to your refrigerator? Like, most refrigerators used to not be electric, obviously. Every refrigerator used to not be electric, and you'd have an iceman show up, and you would buy ice. How did they transport the ice from far as fuck to Georgia and give it to you, and it wasn't melted? They had a cooler. What fucking cooler kept ice that cold to where you would go from buttfuck nowhere, 1,000 miles, and you'd give me ice in fucking Virginia or some shit? Like, where did they sell ice? Where was the ice trade popular in the U.S.? New York, Boston, and Chicago. Shipped from 4 corners of the world. They would ship ice from South America, the Caribbean, Southeast Asia, and Australia. Dude, you're telling me they would fucking ship ice from South America and it would stay in ice form all the way to the fucking United States, and they would put that in some dickhead's freezer to fucking keep his ground beef cold. No way.
For the average consumer, and the average American could live like the upper class from the previous generation. Technological advances made before, during, and after the war, such as plastics, television,
nitrogen, dumb fuck. They had nitrogen then? How did they keep the ice cold back in the ice trade days? Insulating it with straw and sawdust, and they put it in a warehouse. They definitely didn't use fucking nitrogen. Nitrogen, dumbass! You ever see that shit when you bite it and it goes and it comes out of your mouth and it's cold? And they did the one fucking school meeting where the guy poured nitrogen in a cup and it went flurry.
Tape, transistors, integrated circuits, and lasers played a key
role
in the tremendous improvements in the typical standard.
Mark Rober did it. Mark Rober's not born in the fucking 1800s!
Of living. With this extended period of optimism came a cultural rush, especially in the music industry, where the Beatles, Bob Dylan, the Rolling Stones, and many other artists and bands all became extremely popular. Not everything was sunshine and rainbows, of course, as it was a time period where major political discussion around topics like the sexual revolution, civil rights, nuclear weaponry, ethnocultural diversity, and environmental protection all became popular and heavily debated. This was because this generation was a lot more radical. Many people during this time had different perspectives, and a lot of them favored more left-leaning social causes in almost every direction.
Bro, you know what's so weird, though, is like baby boomers were a very progressive society, and now I would say more than not, baby boomers are more close-minded than people today. Like, it's so weird that so many baby boomers were, like, a part of the change, and now they don't want change.
Opposing existing conservative traditionalist thinking.
Not all of them. That's a broad assumption.
Others still had. Many of these major political disagreements resulted in protests that were becoming increasingly violent, especially as the Vietnam War lingered on and on. The United States would slowly become more divided, and government distrust would rise in the following generations. Generation X. This generation is often called the latchkey generation, which stems from the children of this generation returning from school to an empty home and needing to use a door key to let themselves in. As a result of living in an era of a lot of free-range parenting, increasing divorce rates, increased maternal participation in the workforce, and widespread availability of childcare options outside the home. Young adults of this time period were dubbed the MTV generation, sometimes characterized as slackers, cynical, and disaffected. The baby boom era of the last generation was met with declining birth rates during this generation, partially due to the birth control bill being introduced in 1960 and abortion being legalized in 1973. However, demographic changes brought by the 1965 Immigration Act partially offset the declining birth rates from Americans already living there, and contributed to making Gen X in America more culturally and ethnically diverse than America had ever been.
This photo is not from 1965. Like, you're telling me this photo is from Gen X. This looks like this is straight out of the 1800s. That guy looks like he would have a fucking British accent coming to the Americas. What the fuck? This is not from 1965. That might be Abraham Lincoln's grandfather.
Culturally and ethnically diverse than America had ever been. Gen X music saw many alternative rock, hip-hop, punk, post-punk, and heavy metal bands rise in popularity.
Ugh.
Technological innovation boomed during this time period, with the rise of home computing for
punk rock. What's like a good punk rock band that's still popular today? I feel like that was like a trend that didn't really carry on. Like rock still stays like popular, but not that other shit.
Manufacturers like Apple, Commodore, and Atari taking to the scene with their offerings. Video games became a booming industry during the 1970s and 1980s, with arcades becoming widely successful across the country, and Nintendo and Atari introducing home consoles. Compared to boomers, Gen Xers were far more educated as enrollment in college was way more popular. Individualism and entrepreneurialism became one of the most defining traits with Gen X, as the collective generation would go on to produce Google, Wikipedia, Amazon, and YouTube towards the 90s and early 2000s. Generation Y. Millennials. Millennials were the first generation to grow up with the internet, mobile
What's the cringiest generation? I mean, the selection's only really from fucking Gen Alpha, Zoomer, Millennial, Gen X, and Boomer. You can't really say, oh, the greatest generation's cringy because they're all fucking dead. But do you think there's anybody alive from the silent generation? What years was that again? 1928 to 1945. Yeah, there would be. Damn, there's people alive that are part of the fucking silent generation. Like if you're like 100, yeah, my grandpa is 95. Then yeah, he would be a part of the silent generation. I don't think anybody, Dude, there's probably a few people alive that are from the greatest generation. Definitely not the lost generation. You'd have to be 124 to be a part of the lost generation.
Technology and social media. They are commonly described as the first global generation, being connected to the entire world. However, they are also described as the unluckiest generation, due to their average and slower economic growth since entering the workforce than any other generation in history, as well as them being weighed down by student debt and child care costs. Millennials were born at the time of declining fertility rates around the world, and are having fewer children than their predecessors. Young people of the 2010s were often criticized for having less sexual intercourse compared to their predecessors when they were the same age. In 2010, the unemployment rate in the United States reached a record low at 19%. And these economic difficulties have led to a dramatic increase in youth poverty, unemployment, and a large number of them living with their parents. Millennials are also less likely to be religious than their predecessors, though many identify as spiritual. Millennials experienced 9/11, which changed American culture and began the war on terrorism. That's not to say it's all bad for them, however, as they are often characterized for their digital fluency, diverse perspectives, and a strong sense of social consciousness, due to them being born in a time period where global news and information can be retrieved in seconds. Millennials are very active socially and politically, and not afraid to use their voice. And despite the previously mentioned economic troubles they face, more than 8 in 10 feel confident in their finances, which is representative of their generally positive outlook in a more complicated world.
I feel like that's so cap. You're telling me 8 in 10 millennials are confident in their financial situation? I don't know about that. They also,
Gen
do
Z
this.
and
Hold up. Millennial cringe compilation. Where's that one millennial girl that, like, makes the faces every time? You know what I'm talking about, chat? Where she does, like, videos where she's just talking about, like, the stupidest shit ever, but she's, like, so happy about it. Like, it's the coolest thing in the world. Today, I bought more goldfish. We're gonna give them a try. Lele Pons? No, not Lele Pons. God, I don't know. I don't remember her TikTok name.
Gen.
I feel like I need to fucking find this shit.
Why can I never get these open? Ah! I'm about to have a stroke. I'm about to freak out. I'm about to have a psychotic episode. Just ripped it apart. Okay, so we got our eggs, and today we're gonna do what we normally do. I'm gonna put a little mustard, and then I'm gonna take some McCormick Sesame Ginger Crunch, order it online, and then I'm gonna take some of my dried garlic right here. It's like a mustard snowman.
Oh, that face right there. Every millennial ever that's reviewing something. Today we're going to be trying Domino's. Domino's pizza. Fucking, ugh.
Generation Z, Zoomers. Zoomers are not that much different from millennials, but there are some key differences. While millennials were exposed to the internet and smartphones during their formative years...
Show her pumpkin cream cheese video. See, I'll look it up because now I'm curious. Yeah, let's lock in here.
Do you know what I found? You can't see it. Let me show you what it looks like. Do you know what this is? Ooh. It's pumpkin spice cream cheese for my crispy bread. I'm gonna eat my
Bro, like making a whole video about some Philadelphia cream cheese you bought at a grocery store. I mean, to be fair, I make whole videos about, like, the McRib.
crispy bread right now.
Pumpkin cream cheese kind of sounds fucking disgusting, though.
So we were thinking on the way home, Danny and I, what could we put with this pumpkin spice cream cheese? And mind you, I am not a big pumpkin spice person. I don't really like pumpkin spice drinks, etc., but I do like some things. Baked goods, those things. We could put the keto whipped cream on top of this that I have. I was thinking apple slices, but that's a little weird. But if they were cooked apple slices...
That is so much cream cheese for such little bread.
Apple slices, maybe. Also, maybe some granola. But I'm keeping it plain Jane, baby, because I think this is just going to taste like icing. Let's see. Oh. I don't feel like doing it loud. I'm tired. I'm gonna tell you what I like about it. I like that it's not too sweet. It's kind of just lightly sweet, comforting. I like it. I found it at Target.
Bro, I'm just gonna start reviewing, like, lemons. Like, dude, I want to start making TikToks where I'm just like, Guys, you won't believe what I found. And then I reveal it. It's just like ketchup. It's just a random condiment. I'm fucking reviewing A1 steak sauce. And it's just like a 5-minute review. Oh, I review Worcestershire, and it's just like 4 minutes of me trying to pronounce it. Worcestershire. Why do they always give it such funky names?
Witnessed the entire world change, being forced to adapt to it too quickly, Zoomers were born into it. People born during this time period have grown up with the rise of social justice movements, a vicious new form of American politics with the rise of Donald Trump, the Black Lives Matter protests, a new pandemic, and lockdowns that prevented most of them from experiencing a large part of their high school or college lives. On top of that, there's an ever-growing attention and dopamine economy with apps like YouTube and more recently TikTok transforming not just how information is consumed, but their algorithms also transforming what information is sent out to the public. Even something as simple and stupid as memes, which were started by millennials as jokes, have become tools to spread and popularize ideas. Individualism defines the Zoomer spirit, as they have once again returned to the entrepreneurial spirit of Gen X because of the internet. And freelancing and gig economy work is transforming how jobs are run, while the pandemic transformed where jobs are run, at home rather than in office. Social media trends influence culture in a much different way than before, because individuals are now just as capable of getting attention as traditional media and the financially backed entertainment industry, leading to jobs like social media content creation and influencers being the most wanted job, above traditional work. Zoomers also grew up with SpongeBob, which
it is weird that like the line of work I'm in didn't exist 30 years ago. Like, obviously there were actors and shit, but like, I'm a fucking Twitch streamer. Like, that wasn't a thing. And now people want to do that. I don't know.
For more than really anything else in the last century. Generation Alpha. Not much is known about what will happen to Gen Alpha, who is currently being raised mostly by millennials, as it's hard to predict what the future will bring. Described by some as the pandemic generation, they experience everything about the pandemic as young children, and are growing up in a world dominated by changes in their
I think the biggest difference between Gen Alpha and other generations will be the anti-socialness. I think I think there will be a very polarizing gap between Gen Alpha in the sense that I think half of Gen Alpha will be overtly extroverted, right? So extroverted to the point where like they don't want to be like the other half of their generation. And then half of even Gen Z. Well, Gen Z has a lot of people that are antisocial, but I'm saying Gen Alpha will be worse because they grew up in a pandemic time and they grew up growing up with social media. A lot of us, I mean, some of you guys are like 14. A lot of us grew up with social media, but you still had that gap where when you were like 5, you didn't have an iPad, right? Like the youngest person in my chat, TOS wise, the youngest person in my chat should be 13. If there's a 13-year-old in here, obviously there probably is, but that would make them born in what? 2011, 2010. In which case you probably didn't grow up using an iPad. Right? There's a chance that you did, but you probably didn't. All of Gen Alpha will use a very high level of technology, and they'll be social in the sense of online interaction, but very closed off in actual social interaction. It hasn't obviously panned out yet because the oldest person in Gen Alpha is probably like 8. But I'm curious to see 10 years from now how antisocial Gen Alpha is.
Education and entertainment due to technology. Many talk about the pandemic of iPad kids, as this generation spends less time with their parents on average than previous generations, instead living independently and self-directed, growing up with the now 20-year-old version of the internet. Many will experience young adulthood in the 20s.
Yeah, like if this is your kid, you're a bad parent. Like if this is your kid crying because you're ripping their iPad, you're a bad parent. Not because you're taking the iPad, but because they have such a fucking attachment to the iPad that's like you raised them wrong type shit.
Many will experience young adulthood in the 2030s and are expected by the United Nations to have an average lifespan of 83 years across the world. Problems that they are predicted to face are mental health issues, misinformation, and polarization, but it's hard to tell what the future will bring for them.
That was a good fucking video.